My daughter-in-law announced that 34 of her relatives were coming to my house for Easter. She said it as if she were the one who owned the house. That same night, my son knocked on my bedroom door. He kept his head down, avoiding my eyes, and quietly said, "Dad, would you mind sleeping in the basement for 2 nights? Kenzie's parents are going to stay in your bedroom." I slowly set my coffee cup down. I didn't get angry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at him and said, "That's fine, but I won't be here. You two can do the cooking, the cleaning, and the hosting yourselves. I'm not the hired help in my own home." They both thought I was just upset. What neither of them knew was that 4 weeks earlier, the legal papers had already been served, and I had quietly packed a suitcase waiting upstairs. The Easter gathering they had spent weeks planning would become a day no one in my daughter-in-law's family would ever forget. Today, I'm going to tell you the whole story, including the parts where I was wrong, because I was. I stayed silent for far too long. I gave in far too many times, and in the end, it was my own kindness that allowed everything to spiral beyond the point of saving. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I read every single comment. My name is Eugene Marbury. Everybody's called me Gene since about 1974. I'm 64 years old and I live in Richmond, Virginia, in the North Side, in a brick house with an alley behind it and a fig tree Eileen planted in 2004. I was a high school band director for 37 years. Now people hear that and picture a man waving his arms. What that job actually is, the whole of it, the entire skill, is standing in front of 85 teenagers making noise and hearing which one of them is wrong. Not which section, which kid. 3rd clarinet, 2nd stand, coming in an 8th late. You develop an ear that will not turn off. 37 years and I still cannot sit in a restaurant with music playing and follow a conversation because some part of me is auditing the mix. And here's the thing about a band that I want you to hold on to, because this whole story is that thing. When one part is wrong, everybody's instinct is to play louder. The section next to them covers it. The brass leans in. The whole ensemble gets louder and louder, trying to bury the mistake, and from the back of the auditorium it almost works. But it isn't fixed. It's buried. And the only way to actually fix it is to stop the band and let that one wrong note be audible in a silent room, which is the most uncomfortable thing you can do to a 17-year-old and the only thing that has ever worked. I knew that. I taught that for 37 years. And then I spent 2 years in my own house playing louder. My wife was Eileen, 41 years. She died 3 years ago in March, in our bedroom, at home, which was what she wanted. She's in that house everywhere. She refinished the front porch herself over 2 summers with a heat gun and a scraper. She painted the front door, and we argued about it for a solid month because I said it was red and she said it was oxblood, and there is a difference, Gene, and there is not, but I lost. There's an upright piano in the front room she bought off a church in Ashland for $200 and spent a year restoring. She cleaned every key with a Q-tip and a bowl of vinegar. I can play about 4 things on it and she couldn't play any, and she'd sit on the bench beside me anyway. I've kept all of it exactly the way she left it. I have not moved one thing. My neighbor across the alley is Otis Wren. He's 72. About 4 months after Eileen died, he started showing up at my back gate on Saturday mornings with 2 coffees from the place on Brooklyn Park. He never announced it. He just showed up the first time and handed one through the gate and said, "You look like a man who needs company more than he needs to go ask for it." I did not argue with him. You don't argue with that. Then in March of 2 years ago, my son Grant knocked on my front door with a rental truck idling at the curb. Grant's 35. He sells commercial flooring contract work, hotels and offices, out of an office in Innsbruck. He's got my hands and his mother's mouth, and for a long time I thought he had her patience too. His wife is Kenzie. She's 32. And I need to explain what she does for a living because it turns out to be the whole engine of this thing. Kenzie runs an account online about hosting, tablescapes, seasonal entertaining, napkin folds, place cards, how to style a spring table, 41,000 followers. She calls it her business. I want to be careful and fair here, and I'll say it once, and then move on. In 2.5 years, that business never once received $1 from a paying client. Not one. I know because I eventually saw enough of their finances to know. It isn't a business. It's a portfolio for a career that hasn't started. Hold that. It matters later more than anything else in this story. That March evening, Grant stood on my porch with his hand wrapped around his bag strap so tight the knuckles had gone white. He said, "Dad, our lease renewal came back up 11%. He said, "We just need 4 months. 4 months to get straight and put together a down payment, and then we're out of your hair, I promise." And every single instinct I built in 37 years of reading teenagers which kid was going to turn the assignment in and which one was already writing, the excuse every one of those instincts was standing up in my chest saying no. But he's my son, and his eyes were wet at the corners, and he looked like his mother when he did that, and my chest went in a way I can't properly describe. I said 4 months. He said 4 months, Dad. That's it. And Kenzie, who had been looking past me into the house the whole time, her eyes moving across the front room the way you look at a rental property, Kenzie smiled at me and said, "We're going to be so respectful of your space, Jean. You won't even know we're here." That sentence should have been my warning. People who actually intend to be respectful do not feel the need to promise it in advance. That is a promise you make when you already suspect you won't keep it. I stepped back and let them in. Now I told you I'd give you the part where I come out badly, and it goes here, at the beginning, because it's the truth and everything after it is downstream of it. I did not let them stay for 4 months because I'm a generous man. I let them stay because that house had gotten so quiet after Eileen that I had started leaving the television on in an empty room just to have a voice in the building. I would come in from the store and stand in the front hall and listen to nothing. 3 years of that. And then there were people in it. There were feet on the stairs and a shower running at 7 in the morning and somebody's phone going off in the kitchen. And I want you to understand that for the first several months, that noise was the best thing in my life. So when it started going wrong, I had a reason not to notice. And that reason was mine, and it wasn't kindness. The first 2 months were all right. Grant did the yard on Saturdays without being asked. Kenzie made dinner twice, though she photographed both of them for about 20 minutes before anybody was permitted to touch a fork. Month 3, it started to drift. She'd come downstairs around 11, pour a cup from the pot I'd already made, and stand in my kitchen complaining that the upload was slow. Month 5, the 4 months came and went, and nobody said one word about it. Not Grant, not her, not me. It just went by like a car. That's the part that still gets me. There was a date. We had all agreed on a date, and it passed, and the silence in that house on the day it passed was the loudest thing that happened all year, and I did not say anything either. Month 8, she started using the front room for shoots. She'd move Eileen's piano bench. She'd take the pictures off the mantel and stack them face down on the floor and put out her own things. The eucalyptus, the candlesticks, the linen. And she always put mine back. I'll give her that. She always put them back within a day or two. But I'd come home, and the mantel would be wrong, and I'd stand there in my own front room looking at a shelf that had been arranged by somebody who did not know what any of it was. One Saturday, Otis handed a coffee through the gate and looked over at my house for a second. He said, "How long they saying now?" I said, "They're working on it." And Otis said, just that. Just, which is a whole paragraph if you've known a man 20 years. I didn't answer him, because somewhere underneath the part of me that wanted to believe my son, I had started to think Otis was going to turn out to be right. Then in February of this year I found the statement. I want to slow this down because I've gone over it a lot. It was a Tuesday morning. I was at the kitchen table with the paper. The mail from the day before was still in a stack on the counter, and I went through it while the coffee finished. Retirement account statement. The one I don't check much because there's nothing to check, it just sits. There'd been a withdrawal. $38,000. It had cleared 5 weeks earlier. I read that page 3 separate times, because part of my brain would not take it on the first 2 passes. And then I put it flat on the table and pressed both palms down on the surface, because my hands were doing something I did not authorize either. Here's how it happened. 18 months before, I had added Grant to an account for household things, groceries, the water bill, the time the hot water heater went. Small, convenience. And in adding him to that, I'd left a door open between accounts that I did not understand was open, and I am 64 years old, and I will not pretend to you that I understood the plumbing of my own bank. $38,000. That is not a mistake. That is not somebody grabbing the wrong card at a register. That is a person sitting down, looking at a screen, moving a number, and then eating dinner across the table from me that same night and asking how my day was. My eyes burned. Not tears, I was too far past that, and it was too early in the morning. It was the dry kind. The hollow kind you get from staring at proof that somebody you love looked at you and decided anyway. I folded that statement in half and put it in the chest pocket of my shirt and went out to the garden. Otis was already at the gate, which told me he'd seen my face through the kitchen window and decided coffee was the correct response. He put a cup through and didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "How bad?" I said, "Bad enough that I've got to think before I do anything." And he said, "Then think." And we stood there and drank coffee and watched a mockingbird run a cardinal off the fig tree. And after about 10 minutes my hands were steady enough to hold the cup with one. If you have ever found something out about somebody in your own family and then had to go back inside and act normal, if you've ever had a piece of paper in your shirt pocket all day while you made conversation over dinner, you know what the next 4 days were like. It's not anger. Anger's too energetic. It's a kind of low humming shock that makes everything in the house look slightly staged. 9 days later, the answer pulled into my driveway. I was on the back steps when I heard it. Diesel, big, a Sprinter van. White, high roof, and it had been times built times the way people build them now for the internet. Cedar slat ceiling, a little arched window cut into the side, butcher block counter, a bed platform in the back with drawers under it. Kenzie came out of that house so fast she nearly went off the top step. She made a sound I have not heard a grown woman make. She had her phone up before her feet were on the driveway. Grant got out of the driver's side with his chest out and his chin up, and I hadn't seen that look on him since he made drum major in 2007. I came around the side of the house, wiping my hands on a rag. I said, "Grant." He turned and the grin flickered at the edges when he saw my face. He said, "Bonus, Dad. We closed the whole hotel portfolio in Norfolk. I earned it. I earned it." He said it without one blink. Smooth, level, no hesitation anywhere in it. I spent 37 years listening to 17-year-olds tell me why they didn't have their music. I know exactly what a rehearsed answer sounds like. It has no seams in it. Real answers have seams. People go back and add things. They correct themselves. They say times well. Actually, rehearsed answers come out in one piece. Kenzie put her arm through his and beamed at me and said, "Isn't it unbelievable?" "Jean, wait till you see it finished." I said, "Congratulations." And I went inside and sat at my desk and put the withdrawal date next to the build date, and they matched inside 4 days. My chest hurt. Not a heart thing. I got that checked. It's the other thing, the one that sits up under the collarbone and radiates into your jaw, which is what grief does when it has run out of anywhere else to go. Then I called a lawyer. I thought about the police. I want to be honest with you, I thought about it for 4 days. And I sat with it. And I understood exactly what it would mean and exactly what it would do to him, and I could not get there. Some things a father cannot unmake. Ruth Ann Vi has done my legal work for 9 years. She's not a warm person. She doesn't do reassurance. What she does is know Virginia law better than most people know their own address. I said, "Ruth Ann, I need to get 2 people out of my house." She said, "Lease?" I said, "Nothing. Not a scrap of paper. Handshake, 2 years ago." She said, "Then they're month to month by operation of how you've been running it, and you need to serve them written notice to terminate 30 days, done properly, and I do it, not you. If they don't go, we file an unlawful detainer in General District Court, and it moves. But Jean, the clock does not start until it's served, and there's a record of it." I said, "Okay." She said, "When do you want it served?" And I sat there in my kitchen and looked at the calendar on the side of the refrigerator, the one Eileen used to write on and that I still buy every year. Easter was 7 weeks out. I said, "Not yet. I'll tell you when." Ruth Ann served it on the 14th of March. Certified, signature required. And she sent me a photo of the green card the same afternoon. Grant signed for it himself on a Friday morning, which meant the 30 days ran out the middle of April. And here's the thing I watched my son do for the next 4 weeks, and it told me more about who he'd become than anything else in this entire story. He never told her. Not that day. Not that week. Not once. He took that letter, and he put it somewhere she would never look, and he went on living in my house and eating at my table like the floor under him was solid. I watched him make that choice every single morning for a month. Meanwhile, Kenzie went into what I can only describe as production. She'd been building this Easter for 6 weeks online, teasing it. Biggest one yet. You are not going to believe this table. She ordered linen napkins in 3 colors and returned 2 of them. She had a florist in Carytown quoting arrangements that came to more than my gas bill for a year. 34 people. Her mother and father, 2 aunts, an uncle, cousins, somebody's in-laws. At no point, not one time in 6 weeks, did she ask me a single question about any of it. Not is that all right, not will that be too many, not where would you like to sit. She was not being rude in her own mind. I want to be precise about this, because it's the thing that took me longest to understand. She wasn't overriding me. I had simply never been in the category of person you ask. The list came on the Monday of Holy Week. I was at the kitchen table with a book. She came in with her phone in one hand and 2 sheets of heavy cardstock in the other, and she did not say good evening, and she did not ask if I was in the middle of something. She put the pages down in front of me on the table. She said, "I need all this by tomorrow afternoon. I've got hair at 10 and I'm shooting the tablescape at 4. She said it the way people talk to staff. Not cruelly, just briskly. The way you talk to someone whose afternoon is an input. I picked it up. 2 hams from a specific place in Church Hill. A standing order at a bakery on Robinson that needed 48 hours. 4 cases of a particular sparkling water. Cheeses listed by brand. 3 wines by vineyard and year. Flowers. 2 colors of ribbon, specified. And down at the bottom, in her handwriting, ice the good kind, not bagged. My jaw locked up so hard I could feel it behind my back teeth. And my son was 10 feet away in the front room. He could hear every word of it. He did not get up. I read that list twice. Then I put it down on the table and smoothed it flat with the side of my hand, which is a thing I do, and I looked up at her. I said, "You invited them. You planned it. You'll do the shopping." Her thumb stopped moving on the phone. She looked up, and the expression on her face was the most honest thing I ever saw on it. It wasn't anger yet. It was times confusion. Genuine, unguarded confusion, like somebody flipped a switch that has worked her entire life and the light didn't come on. She said, "Excuse me?" I said, "The food on that list is for guests you invited to a party you planned in a house you don't pay for, so you'll handle it." And then her face did 3 things in about 2 seconds. Shock, then heat, then something cooler underneath it, which was her reaching for the tool that had always worked. She turned toward the front room and called out, "Grant, come in here." And he came. He came in the doorway with his shoulders already rounded before he knew what it was about, which is its own kind of answer. She pointed at the table. "Your father's refusing to help with Easter." Grant looked at me, then he looked at the floor, and his jaw worked for a second, trying to find a sentence that would satisfy both of us, which is a sentence that has never been constructed in the history of the English language. He said, "Come on, Dad. It's Easter. It's just groceries." "It's just groceries?" As if it had ever once, at any point, been about groceries. I stood up. I picked up my coffee cup, and I held it with both hands, and I looked at my son for a long moment at the way he could not hold my eyes, at how much smaller he had gotten inside himself over 2 years, and I did not say anything at all. I walked out of the kitchen, and behind me I heard her say to him, in a voice that had already recovered, "He'll fold. He always folds. He'll be at Kroger by 9 tomorrow." I went to my desk. I called the bank, and I removed Kenzie as an authorized user on my card, and I closed the door between the household account and everything else, which took 11 minutes, and which I should have done 14 months earlier. The list stayed on that kitchen table all night. Nobody touched it. That was Monday. Monday night, late, after the house went quiet, Grant knocked on my bedroom door. He stood in the hall with his hands in his pockets, looking at the baseboard. He said, "Dad, I know this is a lot to ask." He said, "Would you mind taking the basement Saturday and Sunday night? Kenzie's folks are older and the main bedroom would really be better for them." The basement, which is where my band equipment is, 40 years of it. 3 sousaphone cases, a rack of music stands, 11 boxes of scores, a dehumidifier that runs all summer. And the bedroom he was asking me to give up is the room my wife died in. He knew that. He was in the house. He stared at that baseboard the entire time and he never once looked up. I did not say anything. I looked at him for about 4 seconds and then I closed the door gently, and I stood on my side of it and listened to him stand on his side of it for a while before he went away. And then I packed a bag. Saturday, she went to the store herself. I was in the yard when she came out, sunglasses on, keys in 2 fingers, list in the other hand, and she announced to the general vicinity, projecting it at me, "I'll just do it myself. since asking for basic help around here is apparently too much. She got in the car and left. I want to tell you what I imagine happened at that Kroger on Lakeside Avenue the Saturday before Easter, and I'll tell you why I can imagine it, which is that a woman who was there filmed part of it, and it was on the internet by that evening. The Saturday before Easter at any grocery store in Virginia is a controlled emergency. Every cart is full. Every aisle is too deep. People are reaching past each other for the last of something. She'd have gone through it decisively. She's not a browser. She'd have loaded 2 carts high off that list, brand by brand, and she would not have looked at a single price tag, because she never did when she believed somebody else was absorbing it. Then the register. The young man scans the last item and says the number out loud. She hands over the card with the practiced motion of a person who has never once been told no by a piece of plastic. 2 seconds. Then the beep. He looks at his screen and says, "Ma'am, it's coming back declined." Her smile doesn't drop. It times cracks, times like a hairline in glass, running. She says, "Run it again. It's fine." He runs it again. Same beep. And she grabs her phone and calls Grant. And she's whispering, which is the kind of whisper that carries further than talking, because every word is being forced through the teeth. And Grant, I know exactly what he said, because he told me later. Grant said, "Bri, I don't have it. The van payment cleared, and the insurance, and I don't have it in there." And that's when a woman 2 people back in that line said, out loud in a bright and friendly voice, "Oh my gosh, are you Kenzie? From the hosting page? I follow you." And she had her phone up. Whether she was recording from the beginning or started right then, I don't know. But she was recording by the end of it. The blood went out of Kenzie's face so fast that the cashier asked her if she needed to sit down. She said, "Leave the wine and the cheese. Just leave most of it." She paid for 4 bags. 4 bags out of 2 full carts. Now, I want to stop here, because everybody watching this just felt something, and I want to be honest about what I felt, which was not what you'd think. I did not feel good. I've thought about it for a long time, and the closest I can get is this. I have watched a lot of teenagers get caught. 37 years of it. Kids who lied about practicing, kids who took things, kids who told a story that fell apart in front of the whole band room. And there is not one time in 37 years that I enjoyed the moment it came apart on them. Not once. Because what you're watching is not justice. What you're watching is a person finding out they're not who they've been telling everybody they are. That's a hard thing to watch even when the person deserves it, especially then. She came home with 4 bags and dropped them on the counter, and looked at me, and her voice had nothing left on it. No performance, just raw. She said, "The card didn't work." I said, "No, it wouldn't." She said, "You did that." And I said, "It was on my account. I'm allowed to take it off my account." Her chin went. And for about 1 second, underneath all of it, I saw something on that woman's face that was not anger. It was fear. Real fear. And it was not about the ham. She pressed her lips together and went upstairs, and I heard the bedroom door. And then through the ceiling I heard her crying, and it was not the crying she used to move people. It was the other kind. The kind that comes out when the plan has actually failed and there is nobody left in the room to perform for. Sunday morning, Grant left the house at 5. I heard the garage door and that diesel turning over for the first time in about 6 weeks, and I lay in bed and listened to him back out. And what I felt lying there was not satisfaction. It was a very deep, very tired sadness for a boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder on the drive back from away games, and who was now out there at 5 in the morning on Easter Sunday, trying to fix a thing that he had built himself, brick by brick, over 2 years, by never once saying a hard sentence to his wife. He was back at 9:40. I heard it in the way he shut the door. Too soft. He came in through the kitchen with his shoulders caved and his eyes red, not from crying, from 4 hours of driving and being told no. He said, "Everything's closed. It's Easter Sunday, Dad. Everything is closed." He put both hands flat on the counter and dropped his head between his arms. He said, "I got a party tray from a gas station on Chamberlain and 11 pounds of chicken from a place that opened at 9. That's it. That's what I've got." And Kenzie came into that kitchen so fast her socks slid on the tile, and she had to catch the door frame. Her hair was half done, one side up, one side down. She said, "What do you mean, that's it, Grant? 34 people, 2 hours." And he came apart. Right there. He turned around and his eyes were glassy and he said, "It's Easter Sunday. Do you understand? There is nowhere left to go. There is nothing left to buy. And that's when I came into the kitchen with my bag. I'd packed it Monday night. 3 days of clothes, my pills, the charger, and the small framed picture of Eileen I take when I go anywhere she'd have wanted to see. I set it down by the back door and rinsed my cup at the sink. Kenzie saw the bag before she saw anything else. Her eyes went to it and locked, and every bit of the chaos on her face funneled down into one point. She said, and her voice dropped very low, "What is that?" I dried my hands on the towel and turned around. I said, "I'm going out to the Northern Neck. A former student of mine has been asking me down for Easter for 6 years, and I finally said yes." The color left her face the same way it had at that register. She said, "You are not doing this today." She took one step toward me. "My family is on the road right now. They will be here in 90 minutes. There is no food. There is nowhere for anybody to sit. You cannot leave." I looked at her steadily, and I kept my voice exactly where I wanted it, which is a thing you learn in front of 85 teenagers. I said, "You invited them. You planned it. And you asked my son to put me in the basement so your parents could sleep in the room my wife died in." I picked up my bag. I said, "So the house is yours today. All of it. Enjoy." And Grant stepped forward and his voice broke wide open. He said, "Dad, please, I'm asking you. I know we did this. I know it's us. But they're coming, and we've got nothing, and I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do." I put my hand on my son's shoulder for a second. He flinched like it hurt. I said, "You're 35 years old, Grant. You'll work it out." And I walked out my own front door. The car I'd booked the night before was already at the curb with the engine running. Behind me I heard her voice go up into something that was not language anymore. I shut the door. And I want to tell you about the next 90 seconds because they are the 90 seconds I actually think about. We pulled off my street and I looked at my house in the side mirror. The oxblood door, the fig tree, the porcelain scraped by hand over 2 summers. And I did not feel triumphant. I felt like I was leaving her there with them. That's the thought I had. That is the actual thought that went through my head on Nicholas Street on Easter Sunday morning. I'm leaving Eileen in there with those 2. I faced forward and I did not look back again. I got on 360 heading east and my phone started going about 40 minutes later. I had put a doorbell camera up 2 years before this, after some packages went missing off the block, and one on the carport pointing at the driveway. I never took them down, and I had very deliberately never mentioned either one of them to Grant or to Kenzie. I pulled into a gas station outside Tappahannock, put it in park, and opened the app. I want to slow all the way down here, because I sat in that parking lot for about 50 minutes, and it is the longest scene in this whole story, and I watched every second of it. The video has no sound at the driveway camera, and it has sound at the door. They came in a convoy. 7, 8 vehicles, every inch of curb on both sides of my street. Doors opened, and people got out, men in blazers on a warm April Sunday, women in heels that had no business on that driveway, kids already running for my porch. 34 people, right on schedule. Kenzie came out the front door in a green dress I'd never seen, and her smile was stretched so wide and so tight it looked like it was being held up by wire. She waved at that crowd with both arms. Her father got out of the first car. Barrett Coyle. Big man. Moves through the world like someone who has never once been informed that his opinion wasn't needed. He had on a sport coat, on Easter, in Virginia, in April. He stood at the end of my walk, and looked up at my house, and gave one single approving nod, and said, and this came through the door camera clean, "Now, that's times a house." Her mother came out behind him in cream, scanning my yard with the eye of a woman making a list for later. She stopped at the fig tree, tilted her head, and said, "That could stand a trim, don't you think, Barrett?" He didn't answer. He was already up the steps. And then Grant took the whole group around the side to the driveway, to the van. I watched this on the carport camera with no sound, and it was worse without sound. He walked out ahead of them like a man who has practiced this. He had the fob in his hand. He hit the button, and the lights flashed once. He slid that side door open and stepped back and made a gesture at it, times. Here it is, times, and 14 or 15 people crowded up to look. And they leaned in. And they kept leaning in. And then they stopped. Because here's what was in there. A bed platform. A butcher block counter. A cedar ceiling. A little brass faucet over a farmhouse sink. And the sink was not plumbed. It had never been plumbed. There was no tank, no pump, no lines. It was a bowl, with a fixture sitting in a countertop. The cabinet under it was open framing, no doors on it, just the raw plywood with pencil marks on it from where somebody meant to come back. The whole rear third of that van was studs and insulation with a moving blanket over it. For a year and a half, Kenzie photographed one corner of that van, the corner with the cedar and the counter and a mug and a plant. I had seen those pictures. That corner was beautiful. Nobody had ever seen the rest of it, because there was no rest of it. And now 15 of her relatives were standing in my driveway looking straight into it. Her uncle, big fellow, mid-50s, the kind who wears his opinions the way other men wear cologne, said something and pointed, and I could see 3 people laugh. Then Grant got in the driver's seat and pushed the ignition. Nothing. He pushed it again. Nothing. He pushed it a third time, harder, like force could accomplish what a dead battery will not, and I could see his shoulders through the windshield. That van had sat in my driveway for weeks at a time. 15 people stood in a half circle around it. And you could see the exact second the mood in that group changed from anticipation to something else. They started looking at each other instead of at the van, which is the worst thing an audience can do. Kenzie grabbed his arm and steered him toward the house, saying something with a smile on her face that must have hurt her jaw. And I sat in a gas station parking lot outside Tappahannock, and I watched my son stand in my driveway getting laughed at by his wife's family. And I'm going to say this plainly, that was the worst part of the whole day for me. Not the theft, not the basement, that. Because whatever he had become, I taught that boy to march. I stood in a 100-degree parking lot in August teaching him to hold a horn up, and I sat in a Sunoco lot and watched 15 people laugh at him. Then they all went inside. Into a house with a gas station party tray and 11 pounds of chicken and no place set. My phone buzzed. Text from Grant. Dad, please just tell me the Wi-Fi password. The kids are asking and Kenzie is coming apart. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and got back on the road. I got to Kilmarnock a little after noon. The student I was going to see is named Alicia Boki. She played first alto in my band from 1997 to 2001, and she is now the band director at a middle school on the Northern Neck, which means I taught the woman who is teaching those kids, and there is not one thing in my life I am prouder of. She's been asking me down for Easter for 6 years, and I've said no 6 times. She met me in the driveway and hugged me and said, "You look terrible." I said, "It's been a week." She said, "Hams on, sit down." The phone rang at 20 till 3. I was on her back deck with a plate on my knee looking at the Rappahannock, which is about 3 miles wide down there, and which Eileen always said she wanted to see in the spring. Kenzie's name on the screen. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. She did not say hello. What came through was a voice stretched so thin it barely sounded like a person. She said, "You did this on purpose." She said, "You set this whole thing up to humiliate me in front of my entire family." And I could hear the room behind her. That's the part. I could hear it. 34 people gone completely quiet, the way a room does when it can tell something real is happening. I kept my voice exactly where I wanted it. I said, "Kenzie, did I invite them?" Silence. Hut silence. I said, "Did I agree to cook for them? Did I agree to pay for it, and clean up after it, and sleep in my own basement so your parents could have my bedroom?" Her breath was coming in pulls. She said, "That is not the point." I said, "That's the entire point." And then Grant's voice came in, cracked at every edge. He said, "Dad, we're family. You always said family shows up. You said that my whole life. And I want to be honest with you, that one landed. My chest closed around it like a hand. Because I did say that. For 35 years at that table, in that house, I said that. I took a second. Then I said, "Son, I gave you both a roof for 2 years. No rent, no lease. I paid the power, the water, the internet, and most of the food. Today is the first time in 2 years either of you has had to keep a promise you made to somebody else." I said, "Don't put that on me." And then I heard the room move. I heard the uncle's voice somewhere behind her, not to her, to somebody else. She said this place was theirs. And a woman's voice. She told me her father, in-law Times wanted Times to host, she said he offered. And another one, closer, flat. "Kenzie, what exactly did you tell people?" And she made a sound. Not a word. A high, torn-open sound that came from somewhere under the ribs, the sound of a person watching every wall she built come down all at once with everybody standing there. And then her father spoke, and he was the one that ended it. He wasn't loud. He didn't have to be. Barrett Coyle said, "Kenzie, look at me and tell me whose house this is." And she could not answer him. I heard it. I heard the absence where the answer should have been. I said, "Your guests, your responsibility. I'm on vacation." And I hung up. Now here's the part I did not understand until about 2 months later, and it is the reason I'm telling this story at all. I felt something when Barrett Coyle said that sentence, and it was not satisfaction. It took me weeks to name it, and when I named it, it changed how I think about that whole woman. Because I know that voice. I have heard that exact voice for 37 years. That's a man doing a thing in front of an audience to a person who cannot defend herself. Quiet, controlled, in front of everybody, so that everybody sees who's in charge. He didn't do that to her because she lied about my house. He did that because that is what he does, and he has always done it. And he did it in front of 34 people without 1 second's hesitation, which is not something a man learns to do on the spot. I found out later from Grant, in September, that Barrett Coyle has narrated his daughter's worth out loud at the table since they were children. What they weigh, what they've made of themselves. Who's doing better? And that account of hers, the 41,000 followers, the tablescapes, the linen, the Times' biggest one yet, that was never a business. That was 12 years of a woman trying to produce one image good enough that her father would finally say the thing he has never said to her. My house was the only set she'd ever gotten access to that looked the part. I'm not excusing 1 minute of it. She used a grieving man's house as a backdrop and his retirement as a budget, and she did it with her eyes open. But I understand her now, and I didn't before, and understanding her cost me the clean feeling I had about that phone call, and I'd rather have the truth than the clean feeling. She didn't get away from her father. She turned into him, and she was doing it in my house, at my table, to me. I came back Tuesday. There was a rental truck backed up to my carport before I saw anything else. Grant was carrying a box down the driveway when I pulled in. He stopped. He looked like he had not slept since Saturday. Gray around the eyes, hollowed out. He said, "Dad," and there was nothing left in his voice. No angle in it, no strategy, just the word. I said, "Grant." He said, "I sold the van." He said, "Guy in Hampton, Sunday night, cash. It's not what we put in it, it's about half. But it's enough to give you back some of it and put a deposit on a place in Lakeside." He shifted the box in his arms and I could see the knuckles. He said, "It's a 1-bedroom over a garage." Kenzie cried when she saw it. And then, quieter. She's still crying. She's upstairs finishing. And then he said the thing I've kept. He said, "I'm not asking you for another chance. I know how that sounds coming from me right now. I just needed you to hear me say I know what I did. I know exactly what I took." I looked at my son, and I said, "I know you do." And I put my hand on his shoulder, the way I had Sunday morning. And this time he didn't flinch. He closed his eyes for a second like it was something he needed to hold on to. Then I went past him and up the steps and into my house. It was clean, not perfect. There were scuffs down the hall and a dent in the baseboard by the kitchen and a ring on the side table where somebody hadn't used a coaster in 2 years. But it was quiet, and the light came through Eileen's front room the way it always had, and the pictures were back on the mantel. She'd put them back, every one of them, in the right order. I stood there and looked at that mantel for a while. Otis was at the alley gate inside 10 minutes with 2 cups. He said, "Gone?" I said, "Almost." We stood there while Grant made 2 more trips and Kenzie came down the porch steps with a duffel over her shoulder and her eyes so swollen she was barely looking out of them. She didn't look at me. She got in the truck and put her forehead on the window glass. Grant pulled the rolling door down. He looked back at me once from the end of the driveway and lifted a hand. I lifted mine. And then the truck went to the end of the street and turned, and it was gone. Otis took a sip and said, "You all right?" I said, "Better than I've been in 2 years." And that was true, and it was also not the whole thing, and he knew it, and he didn't ask. So here's what this actually taught me, and it isn't the one everybody expects. Everybody wants the lesson to be times set boundaries times or times kindness without limits isn't kindness, and fine. That's true, and it's on 100 million posts. The real one is the bandroom one, and it took me 2 years to hear it in my own house. When one part is wrong, everybody's instinct is to play louder. That's what I did. For 2 years. Every time my son did something wrong, I got louder, I paid more. I said less. I absorbed it. I covered for him so nobody in that house or on that street would have to hear it. I told myself that was love. It was not love. It was a man who could not stand the sound of his own house when it was quiet, buying noise on credit. And the whole time, from the back of the auditorium, it almost worked. Otis heard it. Otis heard it 18 months before I admitted it, but at times almost times worked. You cannot fix a section by playing louder. You can only stop and let the wrong note be audible in a silent room, and let the person who played it hear it. That's the most uncomfortable thing you can do to somebody you love. It is also the only thing that has ever worked, in 37 years, on anybody. So here's the one thing I'd ask you to actually do this week, and it costs you nothing, and it is harder than it sounds. Think of the thing you're currently covering for. You know what it is you thought of it 3 seconds ago. The bill you quietly pay. The excuse you make to your mother about your brother. The mess you clean up before anybody else sees it. Don't confront anybody. Don't have a talk. Just stop covering it. 1 week. And then listen to what becomes audible. Because I promise you the note has been wrong the whole time. You have just been playing over it. And the question I sit with, most nights, still, what in my life sounds fine only because I am working very hard to make it sound fine? Now I want to hear from you, because people split on this, and I have gone back and forth on it for a year. Comment 1 if you think I did right, served the notice, killed the card, packed the bag, and let it land on them in front of her family. Comment 2 if you think I should have said it to their faces in March, the day I found that statement, instead of waiting 7 weeks and letting it come apart on a holiday with 34 people standing in my driveway. And comment 3 if you think I should have gone to the police about the $38,000, and that everything else I did was a father avoiding the one thing that would actually have taught his son something. Number 3 is the one I don't have an answer for. If you've got one, I'll read it. And tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. It's a little past 9 here, and somebody down the block has their windows open, and it still gets me that somebody's hearing an old band director talk while they're eating breakfast on the other side of the world. And here's the one I really want. If you've ever had somebody move in just for a few months, tell me how long it actually was. Tell me whether you ever said anything, and what it cost you when you did. Because mine was 4 months on paper and 2 years in the world, and I let every single day of that happen, and there is nobody to blame for the middle 19 months of it but me. If this one reached you, nani subscribe. It's an old man in the north side with a microphone and a piano he can play about 4 things on. There's another one coming. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Richmond to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.